I'll now recognize myself for some questionings, and then we'll go to Mr. Lynch and the other members of the committee. Mr. Tedesco, there was an editorial in the Wall Street Journal last week. Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont said Congress in 2006 passed legislation that required the Postal Service to pre-fund over a 10-year period 75 years worth of future retirement benefits. Is that accurate?
No, Mr. Chairman, that's not quite accurate. There's been some misunderstanding about that, which we addressed in our 2012 report on this topic. There's no set number of years that is pre-funded for. What is actually pre-funded, the funding target consists of all the estimated future payments for those who are already retired, and for those who are still working, current postal employees, a more or less pro rata portion of their future benefit payments based on their term of service so far. That means some of those payments will go beyond 75 years because some of the current workers will live beyond 75 years from today, but it also does not include some payments that will be made in less than 75 years.
Okay.
So that's an approximation. The other point about that is it's not being funded in a 10-year period. The funding schedule in the 2006 law was over 50 years or more, although it was somewhat front-loaded in the first 10 years.
All right. So I just wanted to make sure we'd gotten that clear. Mr. Williamson, I agree. You've got some great employees at the Postal Service. I'm friends with my letter carrier. I don't see him nearly as much now that I'm here in Washington. The only time I get frustrated is when there's a long line at the post office, and that's not your fault. It's because people refuse to mail early at Christmas, just like I do. But as someone who wants to I would assume you want to look out and take care of your employees, just like I would want to look after and take care of my employees. And do you think it's a good idea that we actually have these benefits pre-funded so we're sure there's money there and we're not at the whim of a congressional appropriation to allocate money in the future?
Mr. Chairman, we absolutely agree. In fact, as I said in my opening statement, it's extremely important to us to be able to fund our requirements and maintain the commitments that we've made to our employees out into the future. So if we were to follow what some folks have asked and actually I'll ask this, Mr. Tedesco. If we actually go to more of a pay-as-you-go type system and don't refund, what are the downsides to doing that? But besides a whim of congressional appropriations, which is a pretty big one.
Well, given that the Postal Service is intended to be a self-sustaining agency, to the extent there are unfunded liabilities, there's always a concern about whether those will be able to be funded in the future.
And so mail volume's going down, right? So it's not like there's going to be, unless there's some sort of major paradigm change, there's not going to be more money coming into the Postal Services in the foreseeable future. Would that be an accurate forecast?
Yet what has happened over the last number of years is that these obligations have grown in size relative to the size of the organization supporting it. So and
Mr. Williams, you'd agree that you don't really see a turnaround in mail volume, though we may have some revenue enhancement opportunities elsewhere.
Well, I think there's a couple areas within mail volume. With first-class single-piece letters, it is unlikely for first-class single-piece letters to continue to, or will continue to decline, to rise. However, with standard mail, with advertising mail, some of the innovative things we're doing there, it is likely that we can maintain that volume in the system, and then the package growth in the organization.
But you don't think that would be enough if it would go on a pay-as-you-go basis without massive rate increases to pay the accrued retiree benefits?
Well, I think the important element here is, as Mr. Tedesco mentioned earlier, we are 91% funded on our CSRS obligation. We are overfunded on our FERS obligation. And we do have a plan that would allow us to virtually fully fund our retirement health care obligation. So from a Postal Service standpoint, we view that we have solutions and plans that would allow us to fully fund those obligations.
So you'd like to see some of the postal reform we're talking about here come to be,
that is
make
correct.
It through.
Yes.
All right. I'll now go to Mr. Lynch and allow him his chance to do some questions.
All right. Chairman, I see my time has expired. I yield back.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to follow up with I know my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have made a distinction that we may be comparing apples to oranges here based on funding sources, and I wanted to examine that and talk a little bit about the rationale for what we're doing. Now, the Department of Defense is funded almost exclusively through appropriations. Is that not correct, Mr. Moss?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Williamson, the Postal Service basically gets no appropriations and funds itself through the rates it charges its customers. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. So even though we're talking about apples, and they say apples and oranges because the Defense Department gets appropriations, well, they're using part of the money that they get from whatever source to pre-fund their retirement. And Postal Service, I think we're asking that they do the same. Let me ask you, Mr. Moss, you touch a little bit in your testimony on the rationale for why the DOD should have to or is required to do this pre-funding. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, sir. Prior to the establishment of the fund, whenever there was discussion about the funding of the old Champus program or TRICARE, it was primarily focused with the medics and looking at what were the additional benefits or the expansion of benefits that would be afforded to our beneficiaries. With the establishment of the trust fund and the Department having to pay into the fund each year, and I would add that when the Department pays into the fund, as the fund stood up, the DOD top line was not increased by the amount of the payment into the trust fund. So DOD was told, you still have your essential basic funding level, and from that you will start to pre-fund the trust fund. Well, when that happens, now you have much more involvement and much more scrutiny from senior management within the Department, looking at what are the various benefits and what is the impact of expanding or in some way changing those benefits, and as related to the payment into the fund. So there is much more involvement and much more interest on the part of senior management other than just the medics about the health care benefit that we are affording our beneficiaries.
All right, and at the risk of sounding like a Captain Obvious, I had some folks from the post office in my office this week talking to me, and one of their talking points was that they're the only agency within the U.S. government that's required to pre-fund. Mr. Moss, is the Defense Department agency of the United States government?
It is.
And y'all are required to pre-fund?
That is correct.
All right, I just wanted to have them scratch that talking point off so we could talk about some other things next time that we're up.